accessibility to transit, these specific things that we know reduce trips, but to give people an easy tool to estimate that. So some of what I'm going to talk about here with just some sketch numbers for what impact the White Flint development would have are based on running some of those numbers through this tool. We're hoping that the Institute of Transportation Engineers will actually publish that as part of their upcoming guidance, because it's a very important part of what we call changing the rules that help overcome the difficulty of some of these developments. But if you just think about this in a generic sense and use, again, WashCog's data that comes out of their travel demand models. You take the 9,800 additional households that would be approved in the sector plan, and even if you assume no change in the way people travel in these 4 zones that the White Flint sector encompasses, comparing the households located here versus the Montgomery County average, again, that is about 30,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year. That's what it spins up to. If you look at the difference in driving 22 miles per day on average is what people do here now, versus 42 miles per day per household in the county. And again, some of that's higher transit use, but some of it's about shorter car trips. And so if you go also to think about where some of the other reductions would come from, one of the things that's important in this context is transforming from a traditional suburban configuration where uses are separated by major roads and that each individual parcel is focused on one kind of use, to an environment like what's envisioned in the sector plan. This has the effect of capturing a lot more trips on site, giving people the opportunity conveniently to walk, like the work time lunch trip that the governor was alluding to, the convenient trip to the dentist or the doctor if it's nearby. Because the metaphor here is a lot analytically, it's like Velcro. We've all stared at Velcro. In some ways, the bigger the patch of Velcro, the stronger the hold is. But if you look at the one side with the hooks, it's about the connection and the density of those hooks that connect to the fuzz of the trips. So if you think about the hooks as things that keep people on site, because people need to do things, it's about the scope of the project and the mix of the uses that give people that make trips stick, so to speak, because it's convenient to do that. So if you just take that kind of reduction that you'd spin through our little tool, that alone is about 8,000 tons of carbon a year reduced, just to keep trips on site instead of leaving the site like they would in a traditional single-use conventional development. Let's go one more. Okay, and then as the governor alluded to also, street design. This is a really important thing. Go one more. We also looked at this across these 239 mixed-use developments. And this plan, more than triples the intersection density. So you get a lot more connectivity for pedestrians. You have lower traffic volumes and lower speeds on each of the streets, which make them more walkable. There's a lot of reasons why intersection density as a proxy works pretty well. And so if you do that and run that through the model, again, it's a pretty significant impact, about a little less than 7,000 tons of CO2 per year. One of the really important things in looking at this adjustments for mixed-use development is the regional context of where you're situated in the region, what kind of access you have. Because one, there are trips that might actually leave this site and go by walking in a future plan that's redeveloped, because there are actually a lot of jobs just immediately to the north of us in the Twin Brook area. Also, the amount of, it's not just being next to a transit station, it's what kind of transit station you're near. You can get to about 678,000 jobs in a half an hour from the White Flint Metro station. And that has a very important impact on, again, so the transit ridership is about 5,000 tons per year. But, one of the things that our model doesn't do that well, because we're trying to come up with something that's generic, that people can use in a lot of different places, is we have a very gross measure of transit access. And you can actually look at this in a far more detailed way. Because, again, studies of this around the country illustrate something that's very important. The further you get from the station, the ridership share declines. And it's more so for office development than residential development. So placement and how close you are to the station really matters. This is from a study of suburban employment centers in California, for example. So if you look at the White Flint sector plan, it illustrates the critical importance, actually, of that second entrance. The quarter-mile ring is a really important metric of walkability beyond which some people are not willing to walk, especially on the office side of it. But that second entrance really brings a lot more of that northern, the Mid-Pike Plaza quadrant into play in terms of being a very convenient walkable distance that'll capture a much higher transit mode share. But the policies also matter. Again, this is a study from some California suburban centers, but not only does the frequency of transit service matter, but one, how much parking is supplied? Are you oversupplying parking, or are you getting it a little closer to reflect you're in a transit accessible area? And one of the really important insights is the difference between the dashed and solid lines here were places that had employee-supported transit passes versus not. So this falls into the whole realm of transportation control measures, is what they call it in the air quality parlance. But they can be really important. The policies and how you manage the place are very important as well. So what I did was to then take the specific data from, again, a lot is to be determined about how the site would be configured and whatnot. But if you just looked at the amount of commercial development roughly that would be within an eighth, quarter, and half mile, and the amount of residential that would be within an eighth, quarter, and half a mile, and applied a little more detailed estimates of transit capture based on things that you can see in the Arlington corridors, things that you see from other studies in other regions of major rail transit systems, you get a much greater number, more like 14 tons of CO2. So again, these are the kind of things that we're going to look at when we work with Montgomery County on this technical assistance. Because the real gap here, I can tell you, is that there are really two worlds of transportation and air quality planning. There's this domain that goes on at the local land use approval realm that's all about trips and kind of stops there. And doesn't really matter how far those trips are going or the vehicle miles traveled and emissions. And there's a realm that is about the regional models and the federal money. And they're really great at kind of picking up maybe differences in average trip length, but just can't really, for the most part, capture the differences that come from good design and good local transportation planning. So we're going to try to, again, build the bridge between these two things. These are just the discussion slides. So if you can go back one there, or two, sorry. Build the bridge so we can do a little more detail. Because what I've sort of laid out here in just a sketch term, each of these elements are missing some part of the story because you have to actually connect a bunch of tools together to get the story right. The simple approach I did, we're just kind of comparing households to households, has the advantage of it captures that subtle averages in somebody's driving 2 miles to the grocery store instead of 8 when you live here versus further out. But that was only residential. It doesn't get it commercial. When I looked at some of the numbers of just the sector plan configuration, but didn't do the detailed transit analysis, it gets about 25,000 tons. But if you tweak the transit ridership and look at it in a little more detailed way, again, you can probably get a little more accurate picture of what the real greenhouse gas reductions would be from this kind of development. And again, the development going here versus it's going to go somewhere else in this region, and that's really the 64,000. Well, I'm sure it's more than a $64,000 question. Probably have to update that phrase for inflation or something like that. But anyway, that's really part of it. It's difficult business, and more of it is going to happen now, regardless of what happens with cap and trade legislation and whether there's formal regional plans. But there will, states and metropolitan planning organizations are already doing this stuff and struggling with it. So it's something we look forward to working with Montgomery County with, to be a leading example of how you do this. There's a fine line between the rigor and expense of analysis and something that's practical that counties and cities can do. So I thank you for inviting me to speak.